Hey everybody, we are Launcher at the Washington Post, covering video games for the Washington Post. My name is Gene Park, and this is Elise Favis, and we are counting down our top 10 PlayStation 4 exclusives. The PS4 was a absolute behemoth in terms of pumping out exclusives, especially in the last 2 years. It's not quite as prolific as Nintendo, but I really think Sony has carved itself a powerful niche in single-player adventure games.
A lot of people equate PlayStation to rich story games, but I think that they've gone beyond that in the last generation, showing that they're not just storytellers.
So, Gene Park's number 10, Ratchet and Clank. Number 9, Horizon Zero Dawn. Number 8, Uncharted Lost Legacy. Number 7, Death Stranding. Number 6, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Number 5, Ghosts of Tsushima. Number 4, Marvel Spider-Man. Number 3, God of War. Number 2, The Last of Us Part 2. And number 1 is Bloodborne.
So mine are at number 10, Astrobot Rescue Mission. Number 9, Dreams. Number 8, Until Dawn.
It was just a prank, Han.
Number 7, Marvel Spider-Man. Number 6, Uncharted Lost Legacy. Number 5, God of War. Number 4, Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. Number 3, Shadow of the Colossus Remake. Number 2, Horizon Zero Dawn. Number 1, The Last of Us Part 2.
We're just going to talk about some of the games of each of our lists and kind of reminisce about the good times that we had. On my list, number 10 is Ratchet and Clank. The game really flew under the radar for a lot of folks. It was also a licensed tie-in for a big budget Sony animated movie that really flopped, both critically and in the box office.
If you have heart, then you have what it takes. You don't have what it takes.
And it's unfortunate because the game story was tied so heavily to this movie, to the movie characters that were completely different from the characterizations of the previous games. At the same time, it just goes to show how Insomniac Games is just so good at making games, even if the story ends up kind of being really disappointing, because this is still one of the better Ratchet and Clank games ever to come out. It's just effortlessly good at platforming, at coming up with creative guns. It feels great to play. It looks amazing, and this is why I'm so looking forward to the PS5 exclusive Rift Apart. Even if I don't know what the story is about, I know that we're probably going to get some amazing worlds to explore. It kind of reminds me of your number 10 on your list, Astrobot Rescue Mission. So perfect in terms of being a platformer and as well as innovating in the VR space.
It's funny because I think the first time I played Astrobot Rescue Mission was on a show floor. I was looking at all sorts of different VR games and my expectations were low because VR games most of the time are just, the quality isn't great. I remember I put on the PSVR headset, this PR guy was walking me through it, and immediately I was just like, as soon as I started playing, I was like there is something about this game that just clicks. You mentioned it in our article, like the Mario comparison is perfect because it really does take that Nintendo charm and translate it into VR in ways that frankly no other developer has before. I think another one that, speaking of flying under people's radars, is Dreams from Media Molecule. They're the creators of Little Big Planet. They specialize in creating games that use user-generated content. Dreams is basically like a blank canvas. The best way of explaining it, I think, is it's almost like an accessible games engine. The things that people have made, they've made, Dark Souls clones and Final Fantasy clones. And there was an Avatar: The Last Airbender game that like a fan made completely. It looked incredible. I am not very artistically talented, but like I love playing all these different levels and experiences that others have made.
So the next game that I'll talk about on my list is Uncharted Lost Legacy. And this one was a bit of a surprise to me even when I played it because I loved Uncharted 4. I think Lost Legacy is just a little better. Uncharted Lost Legacy is a DLC chapter for Uncharted 4, starring Nadine and Chloe, who was one of the protagonists of Uncharted 2. It really just continues to expand on the gameplay concepts. I just feel like it was such a tighter experience, and I think for me personally, the real reason why I love Uncharted games is because of Chloe and her character and how well she's written, and how much nuance she brings to being a hero of the story and being an action hero.
And I love that they picked Nadine because she was essentially a villain, from Uncharted 4, and
she was an ambiguous villain in Uncharted 4, and
Right.
I was just like, what's her deal, and what happened to her? And now we do, and we get to
Right.
know her in a much more interesting. She's a fascinating person.
Chloe and Nadine, what an unlikely duo! Like, what a cool idea! Big differences between those characters and have them try and bond.
We play by my rules.
Your number one is The Last of Us Part 2, which is my part 2, number 2. Part
Oh,
2.
okay.
2.
Got it. Lots of twos. Last of Us Part 2. Boy. So, of course, Naughty Dog makes some bold decisions with the story that I think some people found upsetting. I didn't like it because it upset people, but I liked how brave or how different or how bold the storytelling was.
Remember, I don't want to have to shit you in the face.
Before The Last of Us 2 came out, I would always tell people, Ellie is my favorite video game character.
Ellie is my favorite video game character. Ellie is my favorite video game character.
Ellie is my favorite video game character.
Playing through The Last of Us Part 2, I remember, getting about halfway through the story and I was just like, my God, I
don't
hate
know if
her.
I like her anymore.
And, I looked at her in such a different light and I remember thinking to myself, I feel so conflicted. I don't know how I can like this game. And when the credits finally rolled, there was this huge sigh of relief that I had. And I was just like, that was the most incredible thing I've ever played because it made me question and rethink these characters that I've grown to love in such a different way.
You put to words the journey that a lot of people went through, I think, right? Even people who hate the game. And I think a lot of people just didn't really know what to do with those feelings. So they take it out in the game, they dislike the game. And I think those are all valid observations. But it removes the courage of these choices, right? The way they explored these emotions are so raw.
It is a very uncomfortable game to play. And I think that's actually why I like it so much. It brought out such extreme, vivid emotions in me that I had frankly not experienced with the game.
I was exhausted by the end of it. That's why it's number 2 on my list, because a lot of critics call it a game just about violence or the cycle of violence or revenge. But then there's so much subtext within the emotions and how characters deal with each other and how they react to the violence.
Yeah, I mean, it's a post-apocalyptic world with zombies, but it's so much more about human beings than it is zombies.
Also, having lived in a global pandemic for the last 11 months, I no longer question that people would make very, very questionable or illogical decisions in a viral outbreak.
I agree.
Yeah.
Naughty Dog, they like to center around 2 characters, gameplay-wise or story-wise, and I think
Jack and Daxter, right?
Yeah, exactly. It goes all the way back to there. They're excellent at portraying relationships. Until Dawn. It's funny because the way I pitch it to people is I say it's...
You call it a multiplayer game.
Yeah. The way I played Until Dawn was with I think 4 other people. You're playing as a group of teenagers. They're going into a cabin in the woods. Freaky stuff happens. And it is essentially like a slasher movie, the game. The game will periodically transition between these different playable characters. So every time that the, perspective would switch to someone else, my friends would pass the controller. What was fun was seeing how long someone could survive the longest. The smallest misstep in Until Dawn can lead to your unceremonious death.
Yeah, and the story just continues, right?
And the story continues. So it adapts to your decisions very much in a telltale format. It really is about those kind of hilarious deaths and seeing, how long you can survive.
That's cool. I never even thought about that way, but you could just segment it off with 2 different people and they could just play different roles. It's almost like Twitch plays Until Dawn, except with people that you actually like. The next game that I'll talk about on my list is Death Stranding. It was a mixed reaction, mostly because it's a very slow game. It's a game about walking across America, but it's also about surviving a pandemic and about people in lockdown. And it's all about the unseen nobility of delivery people. Essential Workers, the video game. The story can scare off a lot of people because of how nonsensical it can be. But the story really just feels like a 30, 40, 50-hour conversation with your friend who just really wants to talk about the meaning of life.
It is a gorgeous game. That cinematic quality that it has, I mean, you can see that Hideo Kojima took a lot of inspiration from film.
It's funny that a lot of people bring up the cinema because I actually look at Death Stranding as like an Animal Crossing type game, you know?
Really?
because I'm just delivering things and I'm building the roads and I'm making sure that people have what they need, taking care of America like a bonsai tree, setting up infrastructure along the way, you know? It feels very calming, like in an almost Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing type way to just do chores without anyone around. Final Fantasy VII Remake, it almost feels like cheating because it's a remake, but it's not. It almost feels like a greater accomplishment because it's a remake of such a beloved, iconic game. And the fact that they were still able to handle it fairly well and also even have a new twist to it by the end. There's a lot of integrity in how they approach the remake in terms of how they try to retain the spirit, enhance it, and also question the very nature of what even is a remake.
How did you feel about like the changes to the story? Because I know that there was mixed reception about that.
Yeah, it was hard to deal with. You know, Jason Schreier and I talked about this on YouTube, but the more I moved away from the game, I started to kind of appreciate, well, they really did try to do something different. It could still go into what everyone is worried about and go into Kingdom Hearts land and become a completely incomprehensible story. It's already on that path. But so far, from the template that they made with Remake, basically keeping the same story beats, the same compelling story beats of the first game, but just reinterpreting them, even from new perspectives, keeps that interesting. And I think that's a pretty good tech. I hope they continue to follow that in the next ones.
And let that be a lesson to you.
Horizon Zero Dawn. Now, that was a game that had such an unusual premise. You play as Aloy, a young woman who's part of a tribe, but the interesting thing is that this is actually taking place in like the far-flung future where humanity has kind of regressed to the Stone Age. Hostile technology has taken over in the form of these large beasts that look like dinosaurs. Sorry, that was my cat. Dinosaurs. It has this kind of grandiose feeling to its monsters, almost in the same way Shadow of the Colossus does.
I remembered entering new spaces in Horizon Zero Dawn and feeling like very immersed in the moment and wondering what kind of secrets I'm going to find here, you know? And it's very, very hard for a game to do that. And I think Horizon Zero Dawn came at an unfortunate time, at the same time as Zelda Breath of the Wild, another game that was wildly successful at letting people feel that sense of discovery. But I think Horizon Zero Dawn did it too in terms of environmental storytelling and the text and the characters that they created.
These two games succeed in such different ways. Like they're both sort of trying to do that same thing, but I think, you know, Horizon, it does that through story, whereas Breath of the Wild does that through literally letting you just explore and find things.
I agree. The final few hours just completely blew me away. God of War. This is a game that's both of on our list, but Elise, I did not know that this was actually your first God of War game.
It was. I have never looked at God of War as a father-son story. You know, a game that can be sentimental or about relationships. I met Kratos for the first time. It was really interesting to see him, despite not knowing him in the past, see him grapple with anger, with parenting, and loss.
Kratos' wife, who is dead at the beginning of the game and whose death is the impetus of the whole story, her presence is still felt so strongly throughout the game. And I think that's part of due to the writing about how much you actually feel Kratos and his son caring about their lost loved one. The writing just blew me away too. I was really surprised.
It plays really well too.
And it plays amazing. It's a great fun game. It's super violent, you know, it's great.
The boss battles. Oh my God. I don't think I've played a game that has like such polished feeling boss battles as God of War.
Ghost of Tsushima, my initial review, I basically trashed the story and said that it really fails in the cinematic ambitions that it has. But the more you play the game, the more you realize how perfect it is. Sucker Punch Studios really feels like they took a scientific approach to making an open world game, and they really were able to chisel down some of the more fun aspects that people enjoy of open world games and just really refine those aspects to something that is always engaging, always moving, and always rewarding.
I don't know why we survived, Norio. But we did.
On top of that, it's probably the most consistently beautiful game of the last console generation. There's a theme in my list where I don't really like the story all that much. Death Stranding, Ratchet and Clank, Ghost of Tsushima.
It's funny because I would actually describe myself as the complete opposite. I will play through a great story, even if the gameplay is horrible.
But for me, I think if the gameplay is able to kind of either support or make me forget about some of that stuff, then I'm really more than willing to forgive a lot of it. And Ghost of Tsushima, I think, is the ultimate example of that. A story that I really didn't enjoy all that much. It was fine, but nothing stood out for me. But the game itself is just hard to put down.
You found yourself a hunter.
Bloodborne is incredible because it feels like a better version of Dark Souls. I still like Dark Souls better, and Dark Souls is my favorite game of all time, but Bloodborne is really close. It was the reason why I bought a PlayStation 4 in the first place, and it really helped me get through a breakup. Bloodborne came at a time where it was just going to be so good, and it was so good that I completely forgot about any other concerns I had, including moving to Washington, D.C., because I was just so enamored with the lore and the game and what to explore.
As someone who has not played Bloodborne, don't murder me, internet. I really do like the aesthetic of Bloodborne. I love gothic stuff. And I feel like I look at that world and I'm like, I want to explore it. But the thing that gives me pause is just how difficult it is.
It's hard. Bloodborne's a hard one. I would recommend going to Dark Souls or even Demon Souls first. Bloodborne almost operates under the assumption that you understand those other games first. And it also kind of subverts those expectations, whereas the old Souls games are more about defense and hiding behind your shield. Bloodborne is all about offense. It is a beautiful world. That does make a case for accessibility for these games. Their art direction is crazy good. I would hate to see something that cool and not be able to be a part of it. That's all the time we have for today, but if there's another PlayStation 4 game that comes out after this list, maybe we'll update it. But until then, let us know what you think of our choices. Put some comments down below. We may comment. Do you think we're wrong? Do you think we're right? What were your favorite exclusives? And what were your favorite exclusives in other consoles too? My favorite Xbox One exclusive was Sunset Overdrive. So,
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, by Insomniac Games, which is now owned by Sony. So there's that. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next time.